Immigration 101 in recognition of Human Rights Day and International Migrants Day. My name is Michelle Rivero. I'm the director of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs for the city of Minneapolis. And this event is co-hosted between the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs Minneapolis and the city of St. Paul Immigrant and Refugee Program. I will turn it to my counterpart in St. Paul, Edmundo, to introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Edmundo Liho. I'm an assistant city attorney with the city of St. Paul, and I am charged with managing and developing the immigrant and refugee program for the city. Thank you and welcome for being here, and I'll turn it back to Michelle.
Thank you. So this past December 10th was Human Rights Day, this year marking the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this coming Monday, December 18th, is International Migrants Day, a day to recognize another important international agreement on the rights of migrants around the world. We are glad that you have joined us today to learn more about migration to the United States, and I'll just share a couple of quick housekeeping items. There will be time in today's conversation to ask questions and have your questions answered. That will be towards the end of the session, and we'll actually stop the recording at that time. So with that, I'll just keep going. Migration is a natural phenomenon. People move a lot, whether across the country or across the globe. And migration can happen for any number of reasons. For an individual to be reunited with a family member, to pursue educational or employment opportunities because a person or a family is fleeing persecution, or a situation where life is not sustainable, among other reasons. Our offices in Minneapolis and St. Paul work to support the efforts of city residents who are born outside the United States to achieve lives of safety, dignity, and opportunity in this country and in our cities. That includes hopefully working with people to the point that they can and do apply for U.S. citizenship.
The U.S. immigration process can be long and very complicated. It is often scary and seems nonsensical at times. But we are very grateful today to have two incredibly experienced immigration attorneys, Virgil Wiebe, law professor at the University of St. Thomas Law School, and Michelle Garnett McKenzie with the Advocates for Human Rights, who are going to collectively explain the immigration system and give us a good background and what the different immigration statuses that people may hold. What we'll learn about today is the types of immigration status. Virgil Wiebe will be presenting his immigration hotel model as a way of explaining these statuses. Michelle Garnett McKenzie will do a deeper dive on the asylum and newer pathways that you may not, or you may have read about in the news and encountered yourself. And time permitting, Michelle and I will talk a little bit more about the rights that all migrants have to access through the city and county resources. We will wrap up with some suggestions at the end to learn more about collective spaces where you can become more involved. We'll also share our contact information and invite you to connect with us. With that, I'll turn it over to Virgil to kick off the Immigration Hotel.
Great, thank you, Edmundo. So I describe to my students the immigration process and types of status as a hotel, with citizenship at the top being a co-op where there's like the sense of ownership in the building. Below that is the residency floor or the apartment floor. You can think about legal permanent residences, the residents having a lease. If they violate the lease, they can be deported, removed from the immigration hotel. We'll talk about the floor of refuge, which is a place where people can find safety from persecution. We'll talk about the non-immigrant visa floor, which is kind of like a hotel room where you're presumably staying for a short period of time. And sometimes you can be on an extended stay. On the ground floor is the lobby, where you are trying to check into the hotel and maybe you're not allowed to do that. Maybe you are allowed to just hang out in the lobby, sometimes for an extended period of time. The basement are for folks who are undocumented that have either um, come in without status, or maybe they've fallen out of status from one of the other higher floors. And then in the cellar or the dungeon is immigration detention. So there is an elevator. Oh, excuse me. There is an elevator. You see it there. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In today's presentation, it will mostly be working, but some people cannot even get on the elevator to move between floors. Some people don't need it at all, like, for example, people who are born here and already have US citizenship. In the basement, we have people who are undocumented, and as I said, these may be people who have entered the country without inspection through a place other than a port of entry, such as crossing the northern or the southern border illegally. And then there are folks who are undocumented that have fallen out of status. For an example, we'll see tourists on the hotel room floor. They've been granted a stay of, let's say, 6 months. They overstay that period of time and they fall into the undocumented basement floor. So if we go down to the sub basement, detention is a place where people who either are out of status or maybe have status and immigration is trying to deport them. So for instance, we talked about the residency floor, the apartment level floor. Somebody might have committed some crimes that could get them deported. Often immigration is required by law to put these people into mandatory detention. There are some other forms of detention, people who might be eligible for a bond. They can post a bond while their immigration proceedings are going on and be out of detention. And then there's sort of a quasi detention, almost like home detention, intensive supervision appearance program called ISAP, where people have ankle bracelets that track them electronically. So let's pop back up to the lobby or the admissions and parole floor. You'll see there that we have some couches. That's to symbolize people kind of sleeping on couches in the lobby. They're not really checked into the hotel, but they're allowed to hang out. So on the left, you see somebody arriving at the border trying to check in, and maybe a Customs and Border Protection officer thinks, well, I don't really think this person should be let in, but we're not going to send them away right away. We're going to give them deferred inspection. We're going to let them in and have them come back and talk to us later. Another status is called parole, where people are let into the country for a particular purpose. And when that person has fulfilled that purpose, they are asked to leave. Michelle will talk in a little bit more depth about that. There's something called deferred action. The most prominent version of this in the news now is deferred action for childhood arrivals, people who were brought here in an undocumented state by their parents and have been allowed for the last 11 years to get work permits, but they're still really hanging out in the lobby. It's a quasi status. Temporary protected status is for people who have fled situations of, well, temporary protected status is for a situation where people are in the country of the United States. Something bad has happened in their home country, like a natural disaster or a civil war. And the United States says, we're going to let you stay here for a little while until things are better back in your home country. Sometimes that stretches into decades. The most prominent recent example is of Liberians who are in some form of temporary protected status for many years until Congress said, we're just going to let you go ahead and stay and move up to the residency floor and the apartment floor. Orders of supervision are for people who are at the end of their immigration removal process. But immigration says, even though you've been ordered deported and we could do that at any time, we're going to let you continue to hang out. We're going to give you a work permit, often for humanitarian reasons. So let's move up to the hotel room floor. There is a type of visa called a non-immigrant visa, meaning these people are not going to immigrate permanently. And there's a whole bevy of lettered visas for a variety of statuses that are temporary. So the most common is the B visa, which is a visa for tourists or for temporary business travel. We have press visas. We have the H1 and the H2 visas for temporary workers, either high skilled or farm labor. We have student visas like the F visa. We have extraordinary ability like athletes. We have religious worker visas, and we have fiance visas. So those are just some of the temporary visas. It's like a hotel. You're here for usually for a specified period of time, and um, then you are asked to leave. So moving up to the floor of refuge, you might think of this as the chapel or the mosque of the immigration hotel. On the floor of refuge, we have people who've been granted asylum or refugee status. Michelle will talk in more detail about that. People who've survived torture, victims of crime, victims of human trafficking. Some of these forms of refuge can be found on the next floor. Some people on the floor of refuge can adjust their status. That means change their status from more temporary to permanent in the form of legal permanent residency. All right, now moving up to the residency floor, the apartment floor. This is legal permanent residency, LPR status, green cards. These are some of the different ways that residency is referred to. There are different paths to getting residency. The number one version is through family relationships, a variety of family relationships. The tighter the relationship, the quicker the path. So if you are the spouse or child of a United States citizen, that is, those types of visas can be gotten relatively quickly. And when we say relatively quickly in immigration terms, that's about a year. Um, uh, Adult brothers and sisters of US citizens, the wait time is about 20 years in order to get a visa. So there's a wide range of availability of those kinds of visas. After that, there are employment-based visas. Um, there's something called labor certification where an immigrant has to show along with their employer that there just aren't any other people in the country that can do that job and that they're needed for that job. You may have heard of the diversity lottery visa. Every year, several tens of thousands of visas are set aside basically for people around the world to apply for them in an electronic lottery, and people are able to apply that way. Um, we've got cancellation of removal. Sometimes an LPR will make a mistake and immigration will try to deport them, and an immigration judge can kind of forgive that offense and let people stay and keep their green card, sort of a one-off get out of jail free card. Cancellation for people who don't have LPR status is like taking the elevator from the basement floor up to the residency floor. You have to show that you've been here for 10 years, you're related to a US citizen or legal permanent resident, and some other requirements. There are domestic violence-based visas. Unaccompanied children can apply for something called special immigrant juvenile status. People should be particularly aware of this form of relief if you encounter kids who may even be just with one parent. They might be able to get status in the United States if they've been abused, abandoned, and neglected by at least one parent. Uh, so maybe they've been placed in foster care. It's very important to be aware of this and get in contact with the legal services provider because these are time sensitive. It has to happen before the person turns 21. And then there's asylum and refugee based green cards of people moving from that floor of refuge. And then we get to the top floor of the immigration hotel. This is like a cooperative where you own a piece of the pie. There are responsibilities that come with that. There are different ways to get citizenship. One is by being born in the United States. Periodically, there are efforts to try to do away um, with birth-based U.S. citizenship. It is part of the Constitution, so the Constitution would have to be changed in order for that to happen. Another way to get citizenship is to take the elevator from the apartment level floor to naturalize. So you have to meet some requirements along with being a legal permanent residency in terms of time in the country. You have to pass a civics and English test usually. Sometimes there are exceptions to that. There are people who are US citizens if their parents are US citizens. So for instance, I have several siblings who were born abroad. Our parents were both United States citizens. So even though they were born abroad, they became US citizens by way of their US citizen parents. I should have mentioned derivation along with naturalization. That's another form of getting citizenship. Uh, if a child is a green card holder and their green card holder parent naturalizes, they also naturalize or they get citizenship at the same time. So there are several relevant federal agencies that you may have encountered. The big three are all part of the Department of Homeland Security. U.S. Customs and Border Protection includes the Border Patrol. They patrol borders and ports of entry. U.S. Customs and Enforcement, or ICE, is focused on interior enforcement, and they are the folks, usually the ones who are trying to deport people in immigration court. Sometimes they don't have to go through immigration court to deport someone. Then we have U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, or USCIS. They handle benefits requests, so they're the ones who are usually involved in citizenship applications, just for example. Immigration Court is also known as the Executive Office for Immigration Review. It's part of the Department of Justice, and it handles requests from ICE to remove or deport people from the United States. The local immigration court is located in Fort Snelling. There are some additional federal agencies that are very much involved in immigration as well. The Department of State handles visa requests abroad, both for non-immigrants and immigrants. The Department of Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement is involved in addressing the needs of refugees as they arrive from abroad. They are also involved with unaccompanied youth in some ways. And then the Department of Labor is involved in those labor certifications that I talked about earlier. They're the ones who decide whether or not there are sufficient other workers available in the workforce when somebody's trying to get an employment-based visa. So I will hand over now to Michelle.
For 1 second, I just need to say, Virgil Weeby, that was incredible. And you did it like it was a walk in the park. So for everyone who's in the audience, just know this is an immigration overview from an expert, law professor, who's done this a couple of times. So I'm sure you'll have some questions, so we'll save it to the end. But well done, we're on time. And Michelle, turn it over to you.
That was a tour de force, and I put some color commentary in the chat for you as we were going. So please, Virgil, you can do the same here as we go along and talk about asylum. I'm Michelle Garnett McKenzie. I'm at the Advocates for Human Rights, and we provide free legal services to people in Minnesota, North and South Dakota, and Western Wisconsin who are seeking asylum, who have left human trafficking situations, unaccompanied kids that Virgil referred to, and folks in immigration detention in our region. And our jurisdictions really mirrors that of those federal agencies that Virgil was talking about. I'm going to focus right now on asylum because we've heard a lot about that, I think, in recent arrivals from the U.S. Mexico border, certainly folks here in Minnesota, and also in the national news in cities around the country. So I thought it would be helpful if we were able to take a look at what is asylum and how do you get it and why does it exist? So just as a frame, asylum is a human right guaranteed by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, by other treaties, and is part of US federal law. And it's a really important guarantee to people to be able to flee persecution on account of their race, religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion. It's a safety valve against oppression that was created in the aftermath of World War II, because it was clear that people cannot get out of a dangerous situation if no country will let them in. It is a fundamental human right, and it's something that is guaranteed in federal law. And what is it? Well, asylum is available to somebody. It's an application process for recognition as a refugee. It's an application process for people who are present in or arriving in the United States. So you have to be here, either at the border, at the airport, or in the interior of the US to ask for asylum. You can't go into the consulate and ask. You have to come here, and that's the start of the process. You have to demonstrate that you have what is considered a well-founded fear of return to your country. That means that you're afraid to go back, you're subjectively afraid to go back, but also that that fear is objectively reasonable given the understanding of the situation that you face. So that requires evidence and an understanding of what's going on. You have to show that that fear is of persecution. Persecution is a high standard. It is something that is really a threat to life or freedom. It is, can be very many things. There's no definition of persecution. Wise commentator on this reflected that the reason for this is because there's no end to the human imagination to inflict suffering on fellow human beings. And so a list of what is persecution is impossible, but it is more than discrimination. It really is a full-fledged, torture, persecution, other harms, threats to life or freedom. And it's a very difficult call to make for adjudicators and for the individuals who are seeking asylum as well. The reason for persecution must be on account of the asylum seekers' race or religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion. So the motive of the persecutor, even if that motive is misplaced, that motive is important to establish, and it's essential to being recognized as a refugee and granted asylum in the United States. And an asylum seeker must not be barred. There are some people who are barred from asylum because of certain conduct. That might be that they themselves persecuted others, or that they committed certain acts that are defined in the refugee law. That is essential for them to prove that they're not barred from asylum. And if something is covered up and later discovered, asylum can be taken away from people. And critically, an asylum seeker must file their application within 1 year of arriving in the United States. If they don't meet the time deadline, then they may be eligible to be individually protected, but they cannot be granted asylum. And that has real implications on whether they can reunite with family, will face deportation in the future, other things. So why would someone want asylum? What do you get if you are granted asylum? If you want to be on that floor of refuge, first, you get to work. You get to be employed by anyone incident to your status. So you don't need specific permission from the government, work permit to do so. By having asylum, you are authorized to work in the United States. You can remain here indefinitely. As Virgil said, there are violations of conduct. You could if you abandon the US, you go away, you may not be readmitted with asylum. But if you're here, you can remain indefinitely. And 1 year after being granted asylum, you can apply for residency and then ultimately US citizenship. So it's a very important step to rebuilding life here in this country. You can reunite. This is critical. It's usually what's on the top of our clients' minds. You can reunite with your spouse and minor unmarried children if they were left abroad. And they can be included with you in the application if you're all here together in the US. So that family unification component is essential. And once granted asylum, you can travel on a refugee travel document. You don't have to go back to your country of citizenship, whom you fled, and to ask for a passport. So that right to travel and freedom of movement is part of what you are able to those are some of the rights you're able to enjoy as a person granted asylum. But people may be in the asylum process as asylum seekers, waiting in that lobby for a long time before they're approved. So people who are seeking asylum can be employed only with a valid employment authorization document issued by the Department of Homeland Security. That can only be filed for, you can only be authorized for employment once your application for asylum has been pending for at least 6 months. Congress was very clear they did not want people to simultaneously be able to apply for asylum and work authorization, and wanted people to rely on charity or family or other means to live while they were seeking asylum. You can remain in the US while the application is being decided. You're lawfully present while you have a pending asylum application, but it's definitely in that lobby quasi status situation where you are asking to be admitted permanently. You may be detained or subject to electronic shackling, the ISAP program that Virgil talked about. Those are certainly depending on bed space capacity and on the capacity in those monitoring programs, which is quite large. There's something like 400,000 people on electronic monitoring, I think, right now, nationwide. You may be detained or monitored during this process. And you have to file your application for asylum within a year of arrival, but there is no processing time by which the government has to make a decision. So right now we have very large backlogs and very few adjudicators in the system. There are about 1.5 million pending asylum cases system-wide between U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and the immigration courts, and about 1,500 adjudicators system-wide. So that is leading to very long backlogs for people. And during this time, you don't have any ability to reunite with your family. So if your family was left abroad, they stay abroad until you're granted asylum. To get asylum, you do have to file a complex form articulating all of those reasons that you have a well-founded fear of persecution on account of one of those protected grounds, and that you're not barred from asylum. It's a 15-page form. It does need to be completed in English. And you must provide evidence of your eligibility for each of those things. So that can be on everything that's relevant to the case. If you say you're from country A, you have to prove you're from country A. If you say you were tortured in prison and have scars, you need to provide medical evidence of the scars that you are left with. If you say that family and friends are at risk, you have to provide as much information about how they are at risk. That information has to be provided in English as well. So if there's any foreign language documents, those have to be translated by you when you apply for asylum. Again, you have to file within a year, and you have to know where to file. So If you are not in removal proceedings, that if you have not been encountered by Immigration and Customs Enforcement or Customs and Border Protection, and then you have to file these applications by mail with the Service Processing Center in Nebraska, and it will get transferred to the Chicago Asylum Office. And eventually you'll be scheduled for interview here in Minnesota. That can take any amount of time. So it could be soon, but it likely will be, many years before that happens. So you need to keep your address current at all times. If you're in removal proceedings and scheduled to appear at an immigration court, you have to file all of that paperwork with that immigration court. If you came into the U.S. at the U.S. Mexico border and were paroled into the U.S., your court may be anywhere. It may be the place you were paroled. It may be Minnesota because they knew you were coming here. It may be another jurisdiction because there was a mistake, or you were misscheduled somewhere else. So you have to find where you are and get your court here and then file the paperwork and then again wait. If not granted asylum, you're ordered deported. That is the end game for us. That is one option for humanitarian protection, but people have to move for a variety of situations that don't fit the asylum situation. And globally, we're really seeing a need for more flexibility and accessibility for channels of migration. We've seen emerging options in the US. Certainly the Afghan evacuation gave us 74,000 people evacuated in just a few weeks and brought into the US on parole, so short-term status. Then those folks are having to apply for asylum once here. Uniting for Ukraine provided another more flexible pathway where people could petition for essentially folks to come in on parole. And so that it provided an orderly process for individual paroling in. A new program called Welcome Corps has emerged. That is a way for private folks to come together in small groups and sponsor refugees into the United States from some of the world's refugee camps. We have about 35 million people in refugee camps and refugee situations globally. About 20,000 people are admitted to the U.S. as refugees each year. So the Welcome Corps allows individuals to come together in groups, and that's an emerging program, something to really keep our eye on. It mimics programs in other countries and hopefully will give more flexibility. And then there's one other program that's come online for nationals of Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. These are a special parole program you have to get if you want to apply for asylum. So people from those countries can no longer apply at the US-Mexico border. They're turned back. And so this is more of a deterrence option than a humanitarian option. I just would close by saying, we have a new vision, and we have to come up with a new vision for handling migration. There are about 280 million people in migration in the world right now. About 3.6% of the world population is living outside their countries of citizenship or origin. And so that's normal. People move, and we can create better systems that allow people to do that in an orderly, safe, and dignified way. That's it. I'm going to turn things back to you, Michelle.
Mundo, go for it.
Sorry about that. I was muted. Thanks, Michelle and Virgil. Thank you so much for that comprehensive yet succinct explanation of immigration statuses. I think it took me 5 years, the first 5 years of my immigration attorney career, to understand that, and you guys summed it up in like 45 minutes. That was amazing, and I'm very thankful and grateful for that. And now we want to talk a little bit about rights and benefits for new arrivals. So much of our social safety network system and benefits and resources that are available through that system are dependent on a person's immigration status. Their eligibility to utilize that system requires, having a certain type of immigration status. But there are a lot of rights and resources that people can access and regardless of their immigration status. And many of the cities and counties' efforts to welcome new arrivals are directed at supporting access to those rights and resources. For example, every child has a right to an education that is protected by Supreme Court precedent and our state constitution. Every person, regardless of their immigration status, has the right to protection under our federal, state, and local labor laws. They can't be exploited in an employment context. People have the right to redress crimes when they've been a victim of crime. They have the right to report those crimes to the police. And in Minneapolis and St. Paul, we have a separation ordinance, which means that our law enforcement are not going to report people to immigration just because they've reported a crime. They also have a right to redress fraud, such as immigration fraud, and report that fraud to either the city, county, or attorney general's office. And people are not going to be turned over to immigration because they've reported that fraud. People have the right to access public services, including emergency healthcare services. County representatives can determine whether a person qualifies for certain benefits based on their immigration status. But as a general rule, emergency medical services are available to everyone, and women who are pregnant and expecting a child have a right to medical care and delivery. So there are some benefits that social welfare benefits that apply regardless of immigration status. And lastly, but also very important, is that under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, everyone has the right to information regarding government service, regardless of what language they speak. They have a right to have that information provided to them in a language they understand. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Michelle.
Oh, oopsie, sorry. So in addition to having a basic understanding of rights that apply to everyone, regardless of immigration status, and thank you, Abunda, for highlighting some of the most important ones that people may not be aware of. We also wanted to share that in addition to the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs in Minneapolis and the City of St. Paul Immigrant and Refugee Program, there is a proliferation of more offices that are dedicated to connecting people born outside the United States to resources and benefits so that they're able to take advantage of their rights. And this includes county and state level offices. So just want to mention a couple in case they were not already on your radar. There's an Office of New Americans within the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, which was recently established and funded through the state legislature in this past legislative session. And then there's also at the state level, the Department of Human Services Resettlement Programs Office led by Rochelle King. And also at the county level, there's the Hennepin County Office of Multicultural Services, all excellent resources that people should explore a little bit and feel free to reach out to learn how those offices are working on immigrant and refugee inclusion efforts. One last note that I wanted to make is that some people who are born outside the United States may be hesitant or afraid to connect with governmental employees, and a consequence of that is that folks are prevented from accessing resources that are really open to all and that people have a right to access. So it is incumbent on all of us, particularly those who work within the service professions, to recognize that fear and work to establish and foster trust and assist people in, to the extent that we can within our roles, in navigating the many resources that exist for all residents of our city, of our county, of our state, and of our country. And we're at 11:13, and we wanted to make sure that there was sufficient time for people to ask their questions. So I think we'll focus on delivering some closing remarks. I have a number of links to put in the chat for folks in case you're interested in learning more, connecting with some of the entities we've mentioned. And let's see, I think that I'll just share that cities have invested in leading and coordinating efforts to make our communities more welcoming and accessible. And this truly feels like a whole of government approach, whether through municipality or county or state and federal government. It's worthwhile for individuals in different government entities and different departments and divisions to think about ensuring how people are included and can access things that they should have access to. And I did invite each of our speakers to deliver a last message on something that they really thought was important to share with the group. So I will turn it over to whoever wants to pick up the mic and share their concluding thought.
Sure, I'll go first if that's okay. I will just, I'd like to add that, many of the new arrivals and people when they come here, they are vulnerable to a lot of fraud. They get preyed upon by criminals, and it's really important for us to get the message out that people need to feel safe in our city, in both of our cities, and that they can feel free to report crimes, to let us know if they've been taken advantage of by a fraudster. But also, sometimes there are good intentioned people who try to help people. These immigration processes are complicated. So even good intentioned people sometimes can cause problems in the immigration context for people. So we really want people to rely upon our offices for information about services, to be able to report crimes, but also to get information that's accurate and current around immigration. So I'd like to just leave it there that, really reach out to our cities for information and for assistance around crimes.
Who's next?
Next.
Well, I will say that often there is a temptation to give people hope or an option. I tell my students often, don't make stuff up. Perhaps I use a different word in there, but just a charge to you all, don't, as hard as it is, don't say that there is a pathway when sometimes people don't have a pathway. And most people are aware of their situation. Sometimes there is a way through this, but don't make stuff up.
And I think that's so important to underscore. We all want every person to live with dignity. We all have the basic human right to live with dignity, to be able to thrive and build our lives and our families. And sometimes, very often, our immigration status just doesn't, or system just doesn't have room for that person. And that's really hard. And part of our job as advocates and as people who are thinking about what our community should be is to say, what do we need? What systems and what frameworks and what processes do we need? Because the ones we have leave many people out. But it's also to tell people the truth, as Virgil said. And that's the hardest job that we face as immigration lawyers, is assessing when there are no options. And people are resilient and strong and understand that. So the truth is really important, but so is the vision of doing something that is different. We built the immigration system we have. We've invested billions of dollars into the immigration infrastructure we have, and we can choose to change that, to make it work the way that we think it should work as we move forward. So I'm really grateful to the cities for really charting the course of leadership on this for our state. Michelle and Edmundo have paved the way for those state offices and for really creating a government response to immigrant and refugee neighbors that is really healthy, welcoming, and based on human dignity.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to our audience for recognizing International Migrants Day and Human Rights Day in this way. By learning about immigration pathways to the United States. We're going to stop the recording in a moment so folks can ask their questions if you have them, but just also want to share, this is one way in which we're recognizing these two important occasions. The City Council of the City of Minneapolis also advanced a resolution last week in recognition of both events, and I've just put a link into the chat so that you can take a moment and read the resolutions and learn more about these two important occasions. So I will just, before stopping recording, we'll say thank you so much to our experienced, knowledgeable presenters today. We're grateful that you took the time to be with us, and thank you very much to our audience. And I will turn it over to Edmundo to close us out while I figure out how to hit the stop record button. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. And I thank you again, Virgil and Michelle, for presenting today. That was really, I'm blown away by how succinct and comprehensive the presentation was, and very grateful for you joining us. I'm also very grateful for all of you who joined us today to learn more. And this is being recorded, and people can watch it, and I truly encourage people to watch it. I think it's going to provide a lot of information that people are going to find very useful in the months and years to come. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I found the button.